Do you find yourself racing to the bathroom multiple times a day and barely even making it, or not at all? Or maybe when you're leaving the house, you're using the restroom, just in case. Or maybe you do know the location of every single bathroom to all the stores you visit. Or maybe you're having a little bit of an accident when you cough, laugh, sneeze, exercise, go to a trampoline park. Or maybe you're getting up in the middle of the night multiple times to go pee. I think I can help you. So I've learned that almost 100% of my subscribers are female and around my age. This is a huge demographic of the patients that I treat at work, so I figured this could be helpful information. If you're a male, don't worry, don't feel left out. You could still benefit from this video, and you probably know somebody who has issues with these things that I mentioned earlier. Before we get started, disclaimer, yes, I am a doctor of physical therapy, but I am not your doctor, which means everything in this video is for informative and entertainment purposes only. So if you take this information and shit hits the fan, which it probably won't, I'm not legally bound to that. So before I go in depth on all of the don'ts of pee-pee behavior, we need to understand what the pelvic floor muscles are. They're a group of tiny little muscles that sit at the bottom of your pelvis that help with a multitude of things, but generally they help with peeing, pooing, having sex, and keeping your organs from falling out. We also need to understand what normal pee-pee behavior is, which is 5 to 8 times a day and no more than once at night. Anything more than that is considered urinary frequency. We also need to understand what is happening when we ingest fluids. So briefly, fluid is ingested, it filters through your kidneys, and what's left ends up in your bladder, and then you pee-pee it out the pee-pee hole. I'm being very immature, but this is YouTube and not a medical classroom, so bear with me. Anyway, when urine fills in your bladder to about 300 to 500 milliliters, I'd say, you get an urge, and this is where you decide if you're going to go to the bathroom or not. When you sit on the toilet, your pelvic floor muscles must relax to allow the flow of urine to come out. If you decide to go on about your day and ignore that urge, your pelvic floor muscles contract and they keep urine in. Now, the issue comes when that urge is too strong to suppress and you cannot override that signal, and you end up not being able to control your pelvic floor muscles to hold in your pee. Also, I will say that there are much more specific things happening, but for the sake of this video and for easy understanding, I'm really generalizing here. Another thing to note is that your diaphragm, a muscle that helps you breathe, helps with your pelvic floor function, and not using this muscle properly can heavily impact what's happening with pee-pee issues. So speaking of your diaphragm and breathing, we're going to talk about the first don't. Don't hold your breath. So I talked about this in a previous video, but I'm going to beat a dead horse because this is very important. So when you think of your abdominal cavity, you have the front, back, top, and bottom. At the top is your diaphragm, the bottom is your pelvic floor muscles, surrounding is your abdominal wall. What ends up happening when you hold your breath is that pressure has nowhere to go but down. And guess what? Those tiny little muscles at the bottom of your pelvis are probably holding on for dear life when you are not letting any of that pressure escape through your mouth. So when you bend over to pick something up and you're like, yeah, pelvic floor muscles are taking a beating. When you are getting up from laying down in bed and you go, pelvic floor muscles taking a beating. Ever since COVID times when you started wearing a mask and you're grossed out by sneezing in it and you hold it in. So the other thing I mentioned in that video was not going to the bathroom just in case. So when we were young, we probably got into the habit of peeing before leaving the house so you didn't need it when you were in the car, or peeing when you got somewhere or before you started a task so you didn't need it later. Peeing just in case. The reason you don't want to be doing this is because you are going to train your bladder to bully you to the point where you cannot resist the urge to go. So what ends up happening is your bladder fills with urine, right? And if you say, all right, we're going to go to the bathroom when you're at 100 milliliters, basically nowhere near full, your bladder starts to learn like,
okay, every time we fill up just like a little bit, we gotta go.
So every single time your bladder fills to a small amount, it's going to send a signal saying you need to go. If you give in to the signal and you go, oh, I need to pee, when you don't really need to, your bladder wins every time. And it's going to be like,
all right, we gotta pee. Get up, stop what you're doing. Go.
When you go to the bathroom, it's not going to be that much pee, and you're going to be like, wow, why was I racing for all of that? This is one of the biggest behavioral changes that you can make to have the biggest long-term impact, or maybe even short-term. Make it make sense. If you just had a little bit of water, or you know you're dehydrated and your bladder is sending you a signal to go pee and you know you don't need it because you just went, don't go. Don't do it. Don't just be going just to go. Alright, so then we have the opposite. Don't hold your pee too long. So health professionals, nurses, teachers, I'm talking to you. The tendency to not go to the bathroom because you are so busy and caught up in your day is pretty high, understandably because of what your job demands are. However, you are putting yourself at having a UTI by harboring all this urine in your bladder that sits there all day in a warm, dark, moist, bacteria-breeding environment where those things can either go up into your kidneys and you get an infection that way, or down into your urethra where you get a UTI that way. Again, make it make sense. If you know you drank a bunch of coffee and a bunch of water and it is 4 p.m. and you haven't gone and you've gotten the urge multiple times to go use the bathroom but you've ignored it, please go pee. Please do it. A good benchmark that I like to use to stay within that 5 to 8 times a day is going to the bathroom once every 2 to 4 hours. Find that middle ground where you know that it's appropriate to use the bathroom at that time. Ooh, another thing I forgot to mention about holding your pee is when you finally get to go, your pelvic floor muscles have been contracted so long that it's hard to relax them. So you're sitting there wondering like, why can't I pee? Even though I know my bladder is screaming full. Don't race to the bathroom. When you really, really need to go and you have a really, really strong urge, the last thing you need to be doing is racing to the bathroom. Sounds counterintuitive, but hear me out. The reason why is because your bladder is connected to all these fancy nervous system thingies, and those fancy nervous system thingies turn on and off when you're in a mode of fight or flight or rest and digest. In the fight or flight mode, one of the things that your body naturally wants to do is excrete. So what you are doing by running to the bathroom is triggering this fight or flight mode even more, thus sending a signal to your bladder to go. So you're actually triggering the thing that you don't want happening in that moment, peeing yourself. What you should do instead is calmly take deep breaths, stop what you're doing, maybe even stop in place, and try to calm your nerves, because the more anxious and nervous you get, the more it's going to trigger your bladder. What I like to do is actively tell myself, I'm not going to pee myself right now. I am in an elevator. I need to calm down. Or I just distract myself with something on my phone or start a conversation with the person that I'm with. Experiment and find your things that keep you from freaking out when you get an urge. Don't suck in your stomach all day. I didn't think I was going to have to include this on the list of don'ts, but I had a patient once tell me that they spent a long portion of their life since like elementary school sucking in their gut because they were embarrassed. If you have a big belly, just let it hang, because the worst thing that you can do is suck it in and deprive your diaphragm and your rib cage of movement. So what ends up happening is you end up breathing from your chest primarily and not from your diaphragm. And what that does is it causes your pelvic floor to not move properly. So think of your abdominal cavity like a piston. When your diaphragm goes up and your lungs shrink and the air goes out, your pelvic floor goes up with it. When you breathe air in, your lungs expand and your diaphragm goes down, your pelvic floor should go down. When your ribs and your diaphragm aren't moving in the way that they're supposed to be, your pelvic floor isn't going to either, which means your pelvic floor is going to be slightly contracted all the time and it's never going to relax. Let those ribs expand, let your diaphragm rise and fall so your pelvic floor can do the same. In addition, don't hover over the toilet, don't force the flow of your pee out, and don't cut off the flow of your pee. These all go against what's natural for your pee-pee mechanisms, and these habits will cause early onset of confusion for your pelvic floor system. Remember, when you're peeing, your pelvic floor muscles should be chillaxing in order for nature to do its thing. Do not limit your water intake. Comment below if you are one of those people who have been like, I don't want to drink a lot of water because I don't want to need to pee later. Water is not the bad guy. In actuality, the less water that you drink, the more dehydrated you become, and in turn, your urine becomes more concentrated and it irritates your bladder and sends a signal sooner than it should if you had just drank the water. Don't blame one thing, and this is more of a mindset thing, but it does directly impact your body. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this stuff is behavioral. Let's say you guzzled a whole bunch of water, and then you went to Orange Theory, did some jumping jacks, and then you had some leakage. And then you tell yourself, oh, the reason why I had leakage is because I drank a whole bunch of water, and then we did jumping jacks. Yeah, that's probably part of it, but it also probably isn't the whole story. The more you tell yourself that these things are happening because of X, Y, and Z, the more your body believes it. So let's say you drink some coffee or some tea, and 30 minutes later, you end up going to use the restroom even though you just went. You know you didn't need to go, but you might have told yourself, oh, I needed to pee because I drank a whole bunch of coffee or tea. Well, yes, that is probably true, but if you consistently tell yourself, when I drink coffee, I will pee, that is what's going to happen. Having these issues is a culmination of a number of things that are contributing to this. And you might be one of those people where like just that one thing that you stop doing or start doing gets rid of your entire issue. But oftentimes it takes more than that. So I would highly suggest not self-sabotaging yourself and telling yourself that you have to pee when you do X, Y, and Z. Make sense? That being said, I think it's very important that we know what bladder irritants are, meaning the things that make you want to go pee-pee. Unfortunately, it's all the things that we enjoy in life, like alcohol, carbonated beverages, coffee, tea, chocolate, spicy food, citrusy food, and multivitamins. Just understand that there may be consequences where you have more urges to go pee if you consume any of these things. But think of it this way. I once had a patient who went out to a winery with some old friends, and she told me the next day she had issues going to the bathroom. And then I asked her, well, was it worth it? And she was like, oh yeah, I would do it again. And I was like, all right, then we're cool. It's kind of like, going out on a Friday night, getting wasted, and then being hungover the next day. You knew it was coming, but was it worth it? So I know we've talked about a lot at this point, but I kind of want to rein it in and talk about something that includes a lot of the things we touched on earlier. So breathing and your diaphragm, right? So we talked about how when you don't breathe well, your pelvic floor muscles don't move well, thus they don't relax as often as they should. So think of it this way. If you do a bicep curl and you hold that bicep curl all day, eventually that muscle is going to get tired and it's going to give out. Think of that with your pelvic floor muscles when you have leakage. So our Orange Theory jumping jack situation where you're having some leakage there? Your pelvic floor muscles just might not be strong enough to withhold all of the stuff above it when gravity and pressure and all that stuff is coming down on those pelvic floor muscles when you're jumping. Which means we gotta strengthen them. I like to use the hammock analogy. So think of your legs as tree trunks and your pelvic floor muscles as a hammock. You can go to the dollar store and get a deal on a hammock there, and then tie it to some red oak trees. The hammock probably won't last very long, even though you got some sturdy ass trees. Same thing the other way around. You can go to REI and get the most expensive hammock of all time, and then tie it to some flimsy twigs. Let's just say you have a weak hammock and you have some pretty flimsy trees, meaning you should probably work on strengthening those things. So without consulting a health professional, exercising is going to be a way to help those pelvic floor muscles. However, if you're having more difficulty figuring out how to strengthen your pelvic floor muscles, I highly recommend you go see a physical therapist for this. Research says we are the best front line of defense against pelvic floor dysfunction, so... Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that your pelvic floor muscles, like any other muscles, they can fatigue and get tired and give out, aka when you have leakage, or keeping urine in might be a matter of you needing to strengthen those muscles a bit more. Kegels. But stop right there. Don't be doing Kegels if you don't know if you're relaxing your pelvic floor properly. Because like I said earlier, if you're doing bicep curls all day and then you try and do a bicep curl on top of that, not really helpful. Same with your pelvic floor muscles. If your pelvic floor muscles are constantly in a state of contraction because you're not breathing properly, and then you go to try to do Kegels, your pelvic floors probably aren't going to be happy with that extra demand. That being said, we need to learn how to relax your pelvic floor muscles. Going back to breathing. So learning how to breathe with your diaphragm is going to be very important in teaching your pelvic floor muscles to chill out and relax. Again, when your diaphragm goes up, your pelvic floor muscles go up with it. When your diaphragm comes down, your pelvic floor muscles go down with it. When your diaphragm is going down, your lungs are taking up that space because they're filling with air. You want to make sure that you are breathing in through your nose and not through your mouth, because that's just more efficient. And you're not breathing with your chest, like, because you're not going to get nice deep breaths like that. Practice trying to just breathe in through your nose, like super deep, pushing your belly away from you, and then when you exhale, letting the air gently fall out of your mouth and not blowing it out forcefully. There's a lot of videos and content out there that teaches you how to breathe properly, so I highly recommend using that as a guide if you just find it super boring and confusing to do on your own, because this is going to be super essential and something that's like really easy to do to help your pelvic floor muscles relax and hopefully you stop peeing yourself. You can hold muscle tension anywhere in your body, and that can be in your jaw, your shoulders, and your pelvic floor. It is super common that people who clench their jaw also have pelvic floor issues, and vice versa. I always ask, like, do you grind your teeth at night? Because that is a good indicator that they're stressed and they're likely holding tension in their pelvic floor, which means it's contracted all day and not relaxing, so when you finally go to do something stressful, you have some leakage. Something actionable you can do is schedule time for yourself that you know you're going to be in a relaxed state. Also, sex helps. Like, sex is a great stress reliever. Do that if that's what makes you feel better. In this time and age, we're super into that hustle culture, productivity BS, but honestly, making time for yourself is going to be something that will be helpful for you in the long run to keep you from peeing on yourself at the age of 30. Also, something that is super worthy of being noticed is experiencing trauma. So you may have had something stressful or bad happen to you in the past that makes things really uncomfortable down there. And seeing a therapist is probably something you might need to consider doing if you think that your issues are associated with that. But we're not going to get into too big of depth on that, but I just want to touch on that because I do think it's very important. So going back to that whole fight or flight thing and not racing to the bathroom because it triggers your bladder more, stress pretty much does the same thing. Stress triggers your fight or flight system, and if you are in a chronic state of that, your bladder is chronically going to want to empty, which means you're going to be needing the bathroom more often when you're in a heightened state of stress and anxiety. So getting that to come down is really, really helpful using breathing exercises. So the actual science part that happens with this is that your diaphragm switches it into rest and digest. So by doing breathing exercises, your diaphragm, which has a nerve connected to this whole entire system, triggers your bladder to chill out, which also tells your pelvic floor to relax. Woo-wee, this is gonna be a long video, but I really hope that it was helpful for you. I hope that it deters you from having any pelvic floor issues, or it helps you manage them, or maybe it helps you resolve them. But anyways, as I mentioned earlier, if there's something going on that is beyond the scope of this video, please go consult a physical therapist that is trained in pelvic floor stuff, because it can really, really change your life. Like, I work with patients on this every day, all the time, and it is so satisfying to see them improve their PP behavior and live normal lives. So, yeah, share this with a friend, and I hope you have a good day. TTYL. My sign-offs are so cringe. Oh my god.